And so that was part of the charisma of the species. It's not that it's just this pink wormy thing, you know, if you put it, that, you know, that lives in some hole somewhere.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. I'm Billy Brown with
Tony Crosdale
and
Dan Duran.
Great, and we are in a few minutes are talking with Dan about what he does in Philadelphia and well, everywhere else. But first, we're going to lead off with a reminder: if you like us on iTunes or whatever app you're using, you can always reach out to us by sending us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Hit us up on Twitter at urbwildlifecast and find us on Facebook to get in touch with us there. And if you observe urban wildlife or any urban life, it can be plants, it can be insects, it can be snails, it can be birds, it can be snakes, it can be coyotes. You can
Not limited to those things.
not limit. You could go beyond all of those things. You can give us a call at 267-603-3219. Again, 267-603-3219, and leave us a message there. Or if you want to pull out your phone and record a little note on your phone, iPhone or Android, whatever, you can always do little voice notes.
A little wildlife bling.
Urban
We're
wildlife.
going to make a video of that eventually.
We're going to make a video. We got to get Tony in a big chunky sweater, and we'll have him dancing around and doing his Drake impersonation.
I want to have, like, drakes involved.
You like with actual drakes behind you?
Yeah, like male ducks.
All right.
So we can do it.
We're going to make it happen. All right.
My backup dancer agreed.
So we're ready to go. All right. So with that, I want to introduce our host. So I ran into Dan, not immediately because of him, but because of a tortoise that was accompanying him. Gigi and I were down at Bartram's Garden, which is this really great public garden and sort of natural space.
Lots of native plants.
Lots of native plants, which was the estate of the Bartrams. If you know anything about early North American natural history, especially plant collection, but also other stuff, the Bartrams were major figures, and the city now has their property as like a public park, basically.
Yeah.
And I was about to say what Dan was doing, but he can say it.
Well, yeah, so that was my student's tortoise, actually. And definitely a conversation starter. We're out there and...
Chicks?
Yeah, pick up chicks, anything you need. Tortoises are great for that. But we're out there, and actually, we just started this project where we're planting all these different species of milkweed. Right now, we're up to, I think, 5, and we're looking at all these different native milkweeds to see which are most preferred by monarch butterflies, or specifically, basically, which they lay more eggs on and have more caterpillars on, and also which ones are best for their survivorship. Because you can imagine... maybe monarchs like one species an awful lot, but they don't do well on it, right? It's possible that's the case. And so we want to see, is there one that they just do excellent on, and they end up having more adults that are healthy and have even more babies? And we like to know that because right now nobody actually knows that, weirdly enough.
So, like what they prefer and what they do
Yeah,
best on.
we know they like milkweeds, and people say that they like one species more than the others, but it's all anecdotal. Nobody's ever done an actual rigorous scientific experiment. So,
And we were doing this experiment in Philadelphia.
yes.
Why? Any particular reason why Bartram's Garden?
Because they have the space and like us.
Okay.
So, they're really nice and they let us use their land. So it's a great spot, right? It's near the river. It's actually right near where 2 different kind of land formations come together. You've got the coastal plain and you've got the Piedmont. So it's really good, and it'll grow all the species of milkweeds that we want. We can put all of them out there. So it's a great spot.
As someone who's growing to love milkweed, what kind of milkweed species are you planting?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know if I can tell you now. All right, I'll tell you. I think we have. I think we're up to 5 right now. Maybe a 6th one that we're adding. We've got the 3 big ones that kind of everybody talks about. We got common milkweed, but nobody likes it, so we hope it's not the most attractive to monarchs.
It's also all over Bartram's Garden elsewhere.
Yeah, it's really common, but it's not showy. So if you tell people you should plant this plant, they don't want to do that.
The flowers are nice with these like pale.
I like it, but I'm weird. Most people don't like it.
The leaves look really cool too.
Yeah,
Okay,
I got some
we
growing in
are
the
not normal guys.
All
None
right.
of the three of us are normal.
There's some in the vacant lot at the end of my block. If you want,
Yeah, it's not hard to find. But what we'd love to see is that one of the really showy, ornamental type
Butterfly weed.
species. Butterfly weed is another one we're studying. And then we got swamp milkweed.
that's a pretty one.
That's a nice one. And we have reason to believe that may be our winner, but we don't know yet. We also have two other species that we just started planting. One which is so rare, it's amazing. We just found this giant population. Me and my good friend and colleague, Jason Sepko, we found the spot in New Jersey where we saw hundreds and hundreds of green comet milkweed, and there are almost no populations, large populations left around. So we found this giant
Green
population.
comet.
Yes, green comet milkweed. It looks like a bunch of little missile tubes coming off. It's crazy looking.
Okay.
It's a very weird looking flower. Doesn't look like any of the other milkweeds. And then we're also doing now probably purpurascens, purple milkweed, which is beautiful.
So Dan, we didn't actually start with the general introduction to you. Professionally, how do you end up testing milkweed as fodder for monarchs?
Well, I'm an entomologist and I'm an ecologist too. I don't even know which I like to call myself more. I think I consider myself an ecologist that works on insects.
Okay.
And, you know, I'm very, very interested in ways that we can look at insects in a beneficial light. You know, when people say, you know, how do I get rid of this insect? Or aren't most insects pests? I get this all the time. I'm trying to show people
How do I get this out of my yard?
Yeah, exactly. Right. What do I spray to do this, get rid of this problem? And I'm trying to show how important insects and plants can be and the way that they interact with each other, right? I mean, that's most of life on this planet, are insects and plants interacting with each other. That's the majority of life. I am a professor at Drexel University, and I also teach a few other places. I teach right now at the Barnes Foundation Arboretum School. They have a horticultural certificate program, and I am an adjunct professor there. And I give a bunch of different master naturalist programs and just give talks over the place. And one of the things I'm really happy about that has really started moving along is my new nonprofit, the Mid-Atlantic Native and Threatened Insect Zoo, or MANTIS, with a Z, right? So we were trying to be clever. I don't know if it works, but, you know.
It works.
Good. Glad to hear someone thinks so.
It's either a nonprofit or it's a rapper.
You should do. I know you're overcommitted. You should do a damn insect podcast. You seem like you'd be natural for it.
I could. I should probably do something.
We could keep talking about that. It's something.
We thought about spin-offs already, even though we're still trying.
We don't have time to do that. But I want to do something.
If all I gotta do is talk, then I can do it.
Yes, well, you're very good at talking, and that's hard thing to do. But I'm a big fan of the Stuff You Should Know world of podcasts.
Yeah.
And I often thought it'd be great if we kind of did like, or at least facilitated kind of like a wildlife channel.
I love that.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, what I tell students is I'm a professional myth destroyer. That's what I do. I take things you've been told that are bullshit and we take them down. That's what we do. That's my whole job. Is things you thought were true that aren't. I want to help you know it is true. You know?
Kind of like how that snake you saw in the lake in Pennsylvania is not a water moccasin. You know,
yeah. Exactly. Stuff like that. You know, oh God, there's so many things that people say, you know.
Yeah. And they got me. That's like a song idea.
It wasn't a brown recluse that bit you.
It wasn't a brown recluse that bit you. Yeah,
that's
exactly.
A song.
Yeah.
Well, just all the yes, I've seen the eagle. You know what I mean? Or just by the way, eagles aren't rare anymore.
So what does Mantis do?
Well, we're basically trying to get people to understand how amazing, in a positive way, the insects are, right? Because everybody thinks about insects and they have all kinds of ideas, but when you come right down to it, over 99.9% of insects are not pests. And everybody thinks that it's, I know there's some beneficial insects, but most of them are pests, right? I get this all the time. So few of them. Maybe 800, 1,000 species at most. Yeah. Out of literally 1 to 10
and
million
locally
species.
Here, like a few dozen tops.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know the exact number, but it's not a ton. Right, yeah, something like that. Yeah. It's not a ton. And, you literally can't live without insects. And I don't think people realize how important it is. You don't have soil. You don't have flowers that are pollinated. You don't have fruits. Yeah. Vast majority of all of our fruit and vegetable crops are pollinated by insects. You need them. You can't survive them. You don't have birds. Yeah. You don't have pretty much anything. There's no life without insects. And what'll happen is I'll bring these beautiful insects in to show a bunch of school kids. And they'll look at them and they'll say, wow, is that from when you were in Panama? I'm like, no, that's from New Jersey. That's not from far away, right? And you go and you see some nature special, right? It's always about Africa or South America or Southeast Asia. And those are cool places. I'm not saying they're not, but kind of in a way, zoos and natural history museums and nature specials, they all give you this idea that cool nature is not near where you live. It's so far away. Yeah, it's cool. Look at it, but it's out in Africa. Whereas I want people to realize there's all these amazing things here in Philadelphia. You don't need to go to the tropics to find cool things, you know?
Like Necrophila americana.
Exactly.
Where do you find Necrophila americana?
I found one on a dead raccoon in Jersey.
Okay.
I've seen other places nearby.
They're around.
You see them in Philly?
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is a scavenger beetle?
It's a burying beetle.
Okay.
Or carrion beetle, I guess. It's the same
thing. Are these
family.
the black and orange ones that are...
There's ones that are black and orange, black and yellow.
But they sort of bury a mouse or something in the ground.
Yeah.
Lay eggs. And,
some of them, some of them do that, and they so it's kind of disgusting. A lot of people think, but if you look at them, they're actually quite pretty. They're actually quite nice.
They are, yeah.
So they don't smell great, but Hey, again, there's another insect service. You like having dead things around all over the place? Probably not. So thanks some burying beetles.
Thanks some maggots for taking care of that
maggots and ants and scavenger beetles, burying beetles.
We're going to lead off our first piece we're going to listen to. I'll back up. I had been talking to, I'm not sure if I'll include all this, but I had been talking to a reporter about raccoons in Germany. And this was a nature science reporter who lived in England but was German and did a lot of stuff for a German magazine. And then he had referred me to somebody else who we'll hear from later on in the season about the raccoons. Are they really Nazi raccoons? We'll find out. But the raccoons that were released in Germany in the 30s and now are there. They can't get rid of them. So then I was like, all right, by the way, do you have any stories? I've gotten in the habit of asking this, of talking to somebody about one thing, like, if you got something, is there an urban wildlife or nature thing where you live that I'm not asking about, but if someone said, hey, what's the coolest thing happening in your city nature-wise you would recommend? And he said, well, I live in York, in England, and we've got this thing called the tansy beetle, which is quite rare, just seems to occur mostly in York, England. And I'll start by saying tansy beetle, and I'll say, Dan, family-wise, like, where does this fit into the beetle world?
It's a chrysomelid beetle or a leaf beetle.
Okay. And it has a wide range across Northern Europe into Asia. But aside from in the Netherlands, for some reason, it's in decline all across its range. It feeds on basically kind of a daisy, a kind of aster called the tansy, hence tansy beetle, which my co-host and guest host just informed me grows all over the place in the United States.
It's an invasive plant.
It's an invasive plant. I just haven't noticed it yet, as happens with me and the whole aster family, that I just keep finding more of them, and I don't know what the hell they are. And one of those is probably a tansy. Next time I see one, I'm going to be like, oh, you're the tansy. Any case, it's native to England. So the beetle, its stronghold is this very historic small city of York. No, you're thinking New York.
My family is from York.
Your family keeps popping up in all these different ways. Your family came over with William Penn.
Right, from Yorkshire. York.
Oh, okay.
Rosales, yeah.
My wife's from York, Pennsylvania.
There you go. We have a whole lot of York and post-York. The not new New York.
I'm also a big fan of York peppermint patties.
There you go.
Who isn't?
It's so refreshing.
Anyway, the Tansy Beetle project or campaign is a project or program of Bug Life, which is a lottery-funded invertebrate preservation, conservation or set of programs in the UK, whose motto is saving the small things that run the planet. And Sophie coordinates the public outreach and engagement campaign for Bug Life.
Yeah, it's Sophie Badrick, and I'm the Tansy Beetle Conservation Officer with Bug Life. It's a small iridescent green beetle. It's about the size of your little fingernail, and it's only found on the banks of the River Ouse in York, and as its name suggests, it's only found on the tansy plant. So it's quite rare, and it's a beautiful little beetle. It's best seen in sort of August time, which is just at the end of the summer over here, and seeing it on top of this beautiful coppery sheened beetle on top of the yellow tansy plants is fantastic. Well, it's never been there's never been huge numbers, but it has been more widespread throughout the UK. But due to sort of changes in farming practices and changes in the way that we manage rivers and things like invasive species, we have a problem over here with a plant called Himalayan balsam, which can just shade out any other plants, and it spreads along watercourses. So things like that has just meant that the plant, the tansy plant, which is its food source, has constricted, and therefore the tansy beetle has as well. And then other things like flooding in the summer can really hit the numbers. That's at the time when there's larvae and eggs on the plants, and if they get washed off and washed downstream, they die immediately. So increases in summer flooding and a contraction of its habitat have sort of combined to make the numbers smaller and smaller. But we are doing quite a lot of work, and last week I was able to sort of announce that actually tansy beetle numbers in 2015 were up by 3,000. We're up by 3,000 on the year before. So the work that we're doing, it is working. We are getting those numbers back up again, which is great. It's about 24,000 in total. It's all sort of rough figures, as they always are, but there is quite an intensive surveying program that goes on in August time, and that's very thorough, and it's been going on for quite a few years. So we've got quite a big bank of data, so we can confidently say that numbers are definitely up. And as we say, 24,000. It sounds like quite a lot, but they're so confined as well that certain things, somebody deciding that they didn't want the tansy anymore on their patch of land, or as I say, flooding, or if we had a lot of Himalayan balsam coming in and shading out the tansy, would have quite a big impact on those numbers.
How did it end up with its last remaining population, or one of its last two remaining populations, in the middle of a small city like York?
I think that one of the reasons that that's happened is because York itself, it's quite flat and it's got a lot of floodplains and a lot of hay meadows. So that sort of riverbank, river edge hasn't been developed because it's always had the sort of more traditional management, and it's not been developed because it's floodplains. So that and York is quite a historic city, so that there's also other restraints on development, and that's had an impact as well. So it's probably a combination of different things. And then as soon as there was a bit more research done on this beetle that people were seeing, I think then the need to conserve it was realised. So people began to feel protective and want to save it. I think it's a great beetle to be involved with, and when I started in this role about 7 or 8 months ago, and I thought, right, the first thing I have to do is try and increase the knowledge of the general public about the beetle. And so many people in York itself are very proud to have this beetle. They might not know anything about it other than it's green and it's shiny and it's small, but they're very, very proud. So there's a lot of enthusiasm to be involved. And one of the things I did when I started was trying to kind of get people to want to volunteer to do different bits and pieces of work. I attended quite a big event with the Royal Entomological Society, and I was giving away free tansy plants that people could take away and try and grow on, and the number of people that wanted them, because they want to help but they just don't know how. So it's been great from my position to be that focal point and to be able to facilitate all of that, and not only from the volunteers' point of view, but to be talking to landowners or other charities or conservation organisations, and to be advising them, and to be able to then fit the volunteers and the people who want to get involved with the people who need a bit of help and want to maybe increase habitat or do some work on some existing habitat, and be able to join them together and get that work done and hopefully have a positive impact on the beetles.
Do you see sort of interest in the beetle sort of then encourage interest in entomology more broadly, or into other kinds of habitat conservation? Is it serving as like a hook for other things?
I certainly think so, and I think part of that comes from the fact that it gives people, it's quite an easy thing to look at, it's quite an easy thing to find as well. It's not something that you have to only go out on when the temperature's right and when the light's right and when there's certain other foods around and when the leaves are on the trees or off the trees and that sort of thing. In sort of Easter time and at the end of the summer, if you walk to certain places along the banks of the Ouse, you're guaranteed to see it. And I think that hooks people in and hopefully sparks an interest for them to want to learn a little bit more. And that's where Bug Life, we kind of promote people to going towards our website, because that's where all the information about other projects that we've got going on, that are all sorts of things, people can find out that bit more. Or, as I say, if they come along because they have heard about the tansy beetle and they're coming along to an event where I'm organising some tansy planting, then being able to get them outside and show them that bit extra. It's not all sort of focused on the tansy. We'll talk about, if it's a hay meadow, then we'll talk about the work that's gone on there. Or if we're right by the banks of the river, then we'll talk about other bits and pieces and talk about that riparian habitat along by the banks of the river. So I think it really is a hook, and it's quite a nice, easy one, and it's definitely a lot of enthusiasm and people wanting to get involved and almost not knowing how. But this has really provided a sort of little platform for them to take that first step.
Ow! Citizen science!
As big animals that can walk around really easily, like how fragmentation or anything else can affect a really tiny beetle that doesn't disperse well. And you're talking about these beetles as being very poor dispersers?
Yeah, a lot of them are either flightless or extremely poor flight abilities, right? So one of the other things is this. They don't have GPS. They don't know where there's another good patch. They have to cross some habitat that's totally not what they're looking for. They often just won't do it, right?
Yeah.
So they get stuck. And historically, when there were all these big wild areas, they could have just moved along streams and rivers and would have found places. Now they gotta get across parking lots and cornfields and stuff like that, and that's not going to work.
It's not like a butterfly that can get up in the air and flit along. And,
And well, the thing is, even butterflies too, though. Sometimes people think, well, they can fly, so they'll just get away, and they don't know where the next habitat patch is. A lot of times they can't tell. If it's too far away, they're just not going to leave that patch.
Yeah. So that's why even if tansy isn't necessarily so reduced, it still, they could end up. What's the word I'm looking for? This is why fragmentation can be bad. I mean that you can have good habitat in patchy areas.
Yeah.
But if the plants and animals of that habitat can't get from patch to patch easily, then if one patch just happens to get wiped out by a flood, then it can't get recolonized, and so this is disease hits one other patch, and so you end up with the one patch remaining in York. So there you go.
They're all islands. You have to think of all natural areas as islands now, because that's the way it is. Doesn't matter if they're surrounded by the ocean or desert or agricultural fields. They're all inhospitable around these places.
Asphalt. Yeah.
Or asphalt. They're islands, right? That's what they are.
So the nice part about it that I liked and what sort of attracted me to this was the idea of like people in a town rallying around a beetle. I mean,
what is England?
It is England, I know.
Low-hanging fruit.
Well, it happens in New England too. Actually, one of the tiger beetles I study, the cobblestone tiger beetle. I don't remember. I wish I knew the name of it. There's some town up in New England somewhere. It's like in Vermont, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Tony's gonna find out.
One of those little states up there. Yeah.
And they have an entire festival every year for the cobblestone tiger beetle, which is just awesome. So it does happen.
Why is the cobblestone? I have to ask. Why is there something special about the cobblestone?
Yeah,
tiger
it's
beetle?
pretty rare now.
Okay.
Damming of rivers has obliterated most of their habitat, changing the way that rivers move. It's just hard.
I'm gonna guess it's sort of the cobble, like the sort of stone banks,
big stone cobblestone bars. That's what they're looking for.
Okay.
So,
all right.
You flood rivers, you dam rivers, you do anything that changes the water levels and the way that the water moves, and you end up, they go away, right?
Adios.
Exactly.
So, cool. I mean, do we think this is something that could happen in Philadelphia? Like, do we have anything that, or like people rallying around something rare? I don't know.
I could see. Well, I look at the response to the. I mean, it wasn't a citywide, but there was a big response for the toads in the Roxborough.
That is a
Reservoir.
good example.
Well, I don't even know about this. What are we talking
So in
about?
the Roxborough Reservoir.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the far northwest of the city.
It's sad because I lived in Roxborough for a few months. But anyway.
Oh.
So there's Toads breed in the Roxborough Reservoir, so they
which is an old unused reservoir. So it's just like a big flat
marshy. It's
area.
not like full of water anymore. It's like marshy and like ephemeral. So they will come from the surrounding other patches, from people's yards and whatnot, and they converge on the reservoir to breed, and they got to cross roads, so people will close off the roads, and it's like right about now.
You go out there, and it's like families and kids, and everybody's like. They've got like the road blocked off, and it's like a little bit of a toad festival. So I spoke too soon. It is definitely, we got it. So it shows that you can get people motivated about otherwise uncharismatic organisms. I mean, I guess the tansy beetle's like very pretty. Toads are kind of have a cute look to them, but they're not like. It's not like getting people rallying around monarch butterflies, which are big and majestic, and they're wonderful and they're imperiled. We need to rally around them, but that's easy. Compared to like a toad or a little beetle, I think.
So I agree. We could have. So we had a mini version of that, the toads replicating the Plainfield, New Hampshire's response to the cobblestone tiger beetle.
Yes.
Wow.
Way to work it in there.
Really good research.
Crack research. All right. So if you're in Plainfield and you want to drop us a note or it's not that big a city, but hey, about your cobblestone tiger beetles. We'd like to hear about them. And I'll throw this pitch in. If you've got an urban wildlife bling about some neat, keystone's the wrong word, but some neat mascot kind of animal for where you are that your city gets or your neighborhood gets all involved with and gets people out to support, give us a call or email us about it. We'd love to include a little note about that in the podcast. The next piece we're going to talk about, next interview we did, it was purely Tony's idea. But when he said it, I was embarrassed I hadn't thought of it first. Because I'm the reptile amphibian guy.
Herp daddy.
Yeah, I'm the herp daddy.
Herp God.
We've been accumulating these catchphrases.
I see.
But it was so obvious once Tony said the blind salamanders of Austin.
The Barton Springs salamander.
So we're going to hear about it, how the city of Austin...
Dirty punks go to swim.
Where dirty punks go to swim.
Yeah, this is Nathan Bendick, and my official title is Environmental Scientist Senior, and I work for the Watershed Protection Department at the City of Austin.
Great. In a nutshell, can you describe what you do for the Watershed Department?
Yeah, so I'm a team leader for our salamander conservation team, which right now consists of 4 full-time biologists and 2 temporary staff members. And our group has a number of responsibilities that range from habitat management for the species, population monitoring, so we're getting in the water and surveying them, as well as the maintenance of a captive refugium that has over 500 salamanders. It is a building with a lot of aquaria in it, and it houses 3 species of salamander. Two are kind of the target species, the Austin blind and the Barton Springs salamanders. And this is a measure that's part of our habitat conservation plan. So I guess, we'll get into some of these details a little bit later about the, sort of the species ecology and why we do this stuff. But suffice to say that it's kind of like, almost what a zoo would do. So we just have a lot of animals in case they go extinct in the wild or there's some catastrophe.
Kind of like your backup plan.
Yeah, so it's a backup plan. They're still okay as far as we can tell in the wild. This hasn't happened yet, so it's just a backup plan to go with our incidental take permit and habitat conservation plan.
Great. So can you describe the cave salamander species that we're talking about for someone who's never seen one before? What do they look like? Where do they live? Roughly how do they live?
Okay, yeah. So these salamanders are in the genus Eurythia, spring and seep salamanders. They occur mostly in the eastern U.S. So for those, like yourself, you're in Pennsylvania, you'll see Abyss lineata. So the salamanders here in central Texas, same genus, similar type of thing, little slender salamander, but they are neotenic. So they don't transform. They remain in that larval state. So when you're looking for these species, in Pennsylvania in the East Coast, if you're looking for the larvae, you're flipping rocks in the stream, and that would kind of be the same thing we do here to find these. And their habitat can generally be described as groundwater as well as groundwater-associated habitats in the Edwards Plateau region of central Texas. So this is an area, the geology is limestone, and it's been somewhat uplifted. And over the past, say, 15 million years, dissolution of this limestone has occurred, eroded away, forming all these caves in the area, sinkholes, and karst aquifers. We call this karst. So the salamanders are in this karst habitat wherever there's water. So this ranges from like large cave streams that could be miles in length. You can find salamanders in these places. To small hillside seeps. We're talking a gallon per minute, a few gallons per minute, like very, very low flow rates. And they can also be found in miles of first-order streams as long as they're spring-fed. They've also been found using small bottle traps over 200 feet below ground, like in the aquifer. So there are these groundwater monitoring wells people have for the aquifer. And in some cases, if you're lucky enough and you get access and you sample enough times, stick a bottle trap. If there's salamanders in there, you might catch one. And so a few have been caught this way. So it's pretty interesting. There's only so many places we can go underground to observe these things, so there's not a whole lot we know about them when they're in these habitats, except when there are people crazy enough to go in there with scuba gear, or to the extent they can go without that kind of gear, into these large caverns. But once it gets smaller than that or more dangerous, we just don't know. So wells are kind of one way we can look at these things.
What are they? You mentioned them being sort of stuck in their, or sort of maturing in their larval state, I guess.
Right.
But what does that actually look like?
Pretty much like big larvae. So they have external gills, so that's kind of the one, another adjective they use is perennibranchiate. It's a big fancy word, meanings, they keep their gills, right? Okay. So they keep their gills, and they get, maybe 2.5 inches long when they're adults. Some get a little bigger, some not as big, but around there, and kind of brownish in color. Now, that's for more of the, quote, surface-dwelling species, and I'll qualify that in a moment. But some are strictly subterranean. So this is where you start to get things that look really neat and weird. So like the first one described, Eurycia rathbuni in 1896 maybe, long time ago, right? They come to Texas and they found this thing coming out of a well. Okay, first of all, it's blind. It has no eyes. If you look at its face, it's just got 2 little dots. And they do nothing, as far as we know, or not very much at all. And they have no pigment. They're white, and they have a range of other distinct morphological characteristics. Like they have like this exaggerated shovel-shaped snout, and they'll have like some can have long limbs and short trunks. So they're just kind of weird looking, and that's kind of the extreme for the subterranean species. And there are others that, we find in caves, and they have some of these characteristics, but not all, or they're not so exaggerated. And so there tends to be this bit of a continuum in some cases. Oh. Right. So, yeah, we really haven't talked too much specifically about the ones we have here, so why don't we do that? There are three species in Austin proper. So there's the Barton Springs salamander, the Austin blind salamander, and the Jollyville Plateau salamander. Now, the Barton Springs salamander was the first one described and recognized. So previously, I'm mentioning these salamanders in central Texas. Previously, people had lumped most of them together and just called them all Eurycia and neotnes. And later, when with the advent of molecular genetic techniques, they're starting to see, these, even though they look pretty similar, they're actually very different. And so the Barton Springs salamander was described in 1993 and from Barton Springs Pool. And this is a group of 4 springs, Barton Springs, group of 4 springs in a park near the center of Austin. Okay? So it's a strange setting to have a species where that's the only place in the world it lives.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of this. I feel like I've seen pictures of this. This is a place where like people go out and go swimming and tubing and.
Yeah. So one of the springs is
fun.
it comes out in the creek, in Barton Creek, and what they've done for the past 100 years, as far as I can tell, is they've dammed up this creek and turned it into a swimming hole. And now it's a concrete dam, and it's there's concrete all around it, and it's developed. But if you go down to where the springs come out of the ground, there's salamanders there. And then there's 3 other springs, 2 of which have sort of concrete amphitheaters built around them. Well, one's concrete, one is like stone masonry, and then the other one's natural. And that's the last one we call Upper Barton Springs. That one's it's ephemeral. So sometimes there's water there, sometimes there's not. And when there's water, we'll usually see salamanders. But in the pool, yeah, there's people swimming there year-round. The pool is open every single day of the year. So people can go there and swim, and people love it. People love Barton Springs. It's been called the crown jewel of Austin. So it's very important to the citizens. Right. So the blind salamander was later discovered.
Okay.
Because this is a subterranean species, so they don't come up to the surface very much. And when they do, we think it's kind of like accidental, like they get flushed out or they go the wrong way, and they probably don't have much of a chance. That's my educated guess, right? We don't really know, but we see fewer of them, and so one of our biologists, was it like 15 years ago now, saw a strange-looking salamander, and they're like, oh, could this be something different? But it was small, so it was hard to tell. They raised it up, and sure enough, it was this completely different species. And so that one also only occurs at these springs. But as I mentioned, we see it much less frequently, but they're both there. And what's interesting is this is not the only spot where you have so-called surface and a subterranean morph living in the same spring. This also happens at San Marcos Springs, where you have the Texas blind salamander, the one I mentioned earlier that was described in the 1800s, and then the San Marcos salamander, which lives mostly on the surface as far as we know. And the Jollyville Plateau salamander is the other salamander that lives in Austin, and they're a bit different because they live in the northwest part of town, and they're not in kind of this one spring system thing. And that sort of, kind of leads me to why do I have a job and why does the city do anything, right? So we have the Barton Spring salamander, and so back in the 90s, that was the only one we knew to be officially, like, unique in Austin, right? And this thing occurs in this swimming hole. Okay, and at the time there was a developer that wanted to do a bunch of development along Barton Creek or somewhere in Austin. Now this is in the 90s, so I'm in high school, so forgive me if my history's a little off here. And there's an outcry from the citizens, and they're like, we want our swimming pool water to be clean and nice. And there's a salamander here, and you need to protect the salamander because they need clean and nice water. And so there was this political movement called the Save Our Springs movement, where people organized, they petitioned the city government, and they, part of this was petitioning the Fish and Wildlife Service to list the species as endangered. So they were doing management practices like adding chlorine to the pool. They're power blasting all the rocks, like where the salamanders would be. They would draw down the water of the pool to expose some of their habitat. This is just regular, like, cleaning practices to make this natural swimming hole more artificial and what people are used to, I guess. And so now that the species was listed, the city needed an incidental take permit to operate this as a swimming facility, and so that's where they started. They had biologists go and do more surveys to get a better understanding of the city, of the salamander, and the city eventually developed a habitat conservation plan so that they could get an incidental take permit to continue operation of Barton Springs Pool. And so that habitat conservation plan sort of outlines all of the conservation measures that we do to help protect those two species, the Barton Springs and the Austin blind salamander. Now that permit was given back in the 90s, and we just renewed it for another 20 years. So now it actually includes the Austin blind salamander, but effectively the measures are the same because the things we're doing affecting habitat and water quality hopefully help both species equally.
Cool.
So some of the things that we're doing include habitat restoration. So this can be simple stuff like we're going in and that we're removing silt and sediment because it deposits in these areas. They're impounded. Some of them they're not the natural springs. As I mentioned, only one of the 4 springs that comprises Barton Springs is we can really call natural. So the rest of them can get a lot of silt buildup and stuff that wouldn't occur naturally or that would get flushed out. And so we'll manage that just with hoses pumping spring water or even with our hands. But then it also can get pretty serious in terms of restoration because right now we're in the middle of developing. Well, the plans are just about finished to restore some of the habitat. So in one of our springs, sort of bubbles out, and there's this amphitheater around it. It's called Eliza Spring if you want to look it up online. And once it bubbles out, it goes into the spring pool, but the spring pool is then drained into the creek through a pipe that goes underground. This used to be a natural stream that flowed over land. And so what we're doing is restoring this stream.
You mentioned a little bit about the public movement to create to lobby for the listing. In general, I guess, how do people connect? How do people connect with what is not the most outwardly charismatic animal in the world?
Well, part of that formula here in Austin was, because it's linked to the spring and the swimming pool that people so love.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the charisma of the species. It's not that it's just this pink wormy thing. If you put it that lives in some hole somewhere, but it's linked to.
I find them absolutely fascinating. I'm trying to put myself in the mindset as well.
Yeah, but it's linked to the water quality. And the other part of the story I didn't really mention is this spring that comes out in Austin collects water from a 380 square mile area south of the city. A linear distance goes over 20 miles. Okay, so it's a big area. All right. But because it's this karst aquifer system, our scientists have done dye trace studies and found that water from this area, even 10 miles away, 15 miles away, can reach the springs in just a few days. So that means, there's not a whole lot of filtration as far as we can, people think of aquifers like groundwater. Oh, the ground, it filters and then the groundwater is clean and we can drink it. And in this case, it's like, it's just kind of shooting through holes, the water. When the rain comes. So when we're thinking about like, okay, storm water that's running off, anything that people are putting on their lawns, fertilizers, pesticides, if there's an accident, there's pipelines that carry oil if a pipeline bursts. If a tanker truck spills, if a wastewater main breaks that's carrying sewage, if a water transmission main breaks that's carrying treated chlorinated water, if you have enough of it, it can cause real problems. And so that was part of the formula for, like, what are the threats to the species? They're at this spring and they're in this big aquifer, but you can have some event that occurs anywhere in this huge zone pollute it. And so the other aspect of the public support and public perception has been the citizens have approved bonds to purchase vast quantities of land in this area, in the recharge and contributing zone, to protect it from development. Because I don't know if you know anything about Austin, but it is a booming city. Okay, so there's enormous pressure to develop a lot of land, and the city, I think it's been $175 million, including bonds and money that was leveraged to purchase over 28,000 acres to protect not just the water quality for the salamanders, but for the springs, and also for drinking water.
I was going to say, does the city rely on these aquifers for drinking water?
A small amount of people do, and not all of them are within the city. I couldn't give you direct stats on that. Most of the city's water comes from reservoirs and lakes that aren't associated with the aquifers here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other thing I'd mention is the city does have our department has a great outreach program. So they, as far as citizens learning about these things, they reach thousands upon thousands of kids each year, not just to talk about the salamanders and the aquifer, but general environmental stewardship issues and just learning about the environment in Austin. They get into creeks and collect invertebrates. They do all kinds of cool stuff. with school-aged children. And it's really kind of neat what they do there.
If people hear this, I guess particularly in the Austin area, but maybe some of this stuff can be general salamander-friendly things. Like, how could people get involved and help out?
Yes, we've had this question before, and I always struggle with it because directly these are endangered species, so you can't say, well, go out and let me know if you have any salamanders in your backyard, because you need a permit to do that, right? But in general, people can be good environmental stewards, and then to plug another one of our programs, we have a Grow Green program. So if you're a landowner, you could just Google Austin Grow Green, and this has a bunch of information about how to be a good steward on your land, avoiding pesticide and fertilizer use as much as possible, or using it strategically rather than is normally recommended, growing plants that don't require excessive watering, particularly during the summer. We have some mild water crises around here with all the droughts. And so that's for Austin citizens, but really anybody can go to the website and get the information.
Back to summers. So you've lived in Texas.
I have. Well, I wouldn't say I've been there so much I feel like I've lived there.
Okay.
I'm there every year.
Yeah.
All the time. I love it.
One of the things I thought was cool about this was just having a city sort of like rally around.
Yeah.
And you were saying about naming things, about places.
Well, people have said that if you name a species after a place, it's more likely to be preserved or conserved or whatever.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm almost sure, and Tony can check my fact on this, that the Baltimore checker spot is the Maryland state insect, I think. It's not named for the city of Baltimore. It's named for Lord Baltimore's colors.
The flag, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it also happens to occur in Maryland. And so it's a beautiful butterfly.
Yeah.
And, you could imagine people saying, yeah, it's got Baltimore colors, right? So it's like orange and black. And, we should totally, that's our butterfly.
Two good stories about sort of rallying around local critters.
Yeah.
I hope we don't. Part of me is like, ooh, we should rally. Like, we got the toads. Like, rally around something in Philadelphia, but we don't want anything that's rare. I mean, you don't want it to be rare in the first place.
We have things named after Philadelphia. We have multiple plants. We've got the Philadelphia fleabane, which is beautiful, and I grow it in my yard.
It's my new band.
There you go, Philadelphia fleabane. We have Philadelphia lilies, which are also gorgeous, and they're not that common anymore.
We'll wind up in a second, but I wanted to just say mantas. Is there ways that people can get involved, or what can we look for from mantas in the near future?
Well, anyway, we have our website, and we will have a get involved support mantas.
Cool.
Part of there. It is www.mantiz.org. Mantiz.org.
Great. If you're listening to this and you like the podcast, please make sure you, on whatever platform you're using, Stitcher, iTunes, whatever, that you rate us and like us. Please, please, please do it. It helps us get the word out. Let us know what you think. Send us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Hit us on Twitter at urbwildlifecast. Find us on Facebook and get involved there. If you want to tell us a little bit about what you are looking at around you, wherever you are, please feel free to record a little something on your phone and let us know about it. We can figure out a way to transfer the file, or just call us at 267-603-3219 and leave a message. Again, that's 267-603-3219 for
Wildlife Playing.
And we will look at including it at the end of the podcast.
My name is Greg Kirkez of Urban Wildlife Research Project based in Silicon Valley. And that is a gray fox. Here is her story. During the last week of April, out in the South San Francisco Baylands, we came upon the matriarch of the marsh, lying in the grass. Her name is Bold. She rolled over and began licking her raw stomach. We could see that she had been nursing. Bold was taking a break from the tiny pups and warming herself in the sun as it set on the pickleweed. Her den, a tall silvery green alkaline salt bush, was in the background, and inside her litter of pups. I wondered when they would emerge from the tunneled thicket and how many. Looking back, Bold was once a pup born in that same bush. I remember when she first emerged in 2012, a little gray fuzzball, and she gave her father Squat a fox kiss on the nose. He too had been born in that bush. We came to call her Bold because over the next few months she developed from a shy pup into the alpha of the litter and a master hunter. She would live up to her name her first winter when just 8 months old she fought her father for control of the natal den territory. The fight was over in the blink of an eye. Squat took off running and we never saw him again. After giving her own parents the boot, she began looking for a suitable mate. We saw her with several different males that winter. In the end, she chose Gray, an ashy pup from a neighboring den, born that same year and also a master hunter. This year, it's Bold and Gray's 4th year together denning up in that old salt bush. They are descendants of a long line of foxes who have raised pups in that same bush. But that bush, like many others, is threatened by the increase in human activity and development. With our urban wildlife research, we hope to protect these urban spaces and species like the gray fox. Find out more at urbanwildliferesearchproject.com. And a big thank you to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Like, people were like, oh, you like birds? Like, oh, 3 years ago I went to Yellowstone, saw an eagle. I'm like, I saw 4 of them hanging out at a dump.